Hello and welcome back to Advanced Academic Writing with Professor Kent Lee here. In this video, I'm going to talk about reading academic papers. So in my last video, I talked more about what they are, what they're like, so you can understand them. That's an important foundation for this video where I will talk more about reading academic papers if you're not used to reading them or if you're having difficulty reading them, especially if you're reading English academic papers and English is not your first language. So just to recap some things I talked about in the last video, if you're looking at an academic paper, it's important to understand the sort of academic genre. Is it a theoretical paper where the arguments are theoretical, maybe the information that the arguments are based on or drawing from are theoretical? Philosophy, literature, theoretical linguistics. Is it an empirical paper, like observational data with observational data like in a qualitative research study, experimental data like in a quantitative scientific research study? Is it an empirical paper? Is it a case study, which is a kind of like an observational study, which will be a bit more descriptive in nature? Is it a review paper where the author is reviewing other research on the topic and kind of drawing some overall conclusions? Or an applied paper, which is similar, where the author is trying to drive some practical application based on other research, based on empirical or theoretical research. The structure of the paper. You see all or many of these elements either specifically in the structure of the paper, or there are going to be bits of some of these somewhere in the paper, although not always. Again, there's usually an abstract, which is like a summary of the whole paper, an introduction which introduces the specific topic and particular question that the researcher is looking at, and then a literature review, which is kind of a critique of recent relevant research on that very same topic, or academic research papers and studies on that specific research question or hypothesis. Then the data analysis, again, especially if it's an empirical paper, there will be data and data analysis. If it's more theoretical, you might not see anything like this, or it might be like in some qualitative studies, again, some data is presented and then it's analyzed and discussed and so on. If it's literature, this is really interleaved with a discussion. Here's a bit of the poem, here's some analysis and discussion, a bit more and such. Then there's usually a discussion or general discussion section. If it's more of a qualitative or theoretical paper where the writer's gone back and forth between like examples and analysis, then there's kind of a discussion section where the writer brings everything together and explains how the main points and brings it all together. If it's an empirical experimental paper, the writer is then going to bring everything together and say, okay, my experiment has shown this to be the case, and then provides more detailed explanation of why that is, compares it with maybe other research, and discusses the implications. Why is this relevant or important, and how does this advance our knowledge? Then, of course, a conclusion which summarizes all of this, and may also kind of say, this is interesting, this is cool, and then in future research we should look at this, and or this is why this is important, why should you care, in summary. Now, when it comes to reading papers, I think in a past video I might have talked about intensive reading. So for example, if you're reading a paper, you could get bogged down by vocabulary, technical terms, and you could get stuck looking up all those words along the way as you're going along. Then you're not going to understand the whole paper, because you're going to your brain wants to understand the whole thing, and your brain's trying to construct this kind of representation of what does the whole thing mean as you're going along. But then if you stop to look up words, then this process, this conceptual process, gets interrupted, and your brain can't put things together. Your brain's going to go, okay, what the heck does all of this mean? You won't understand it. So I talked about intensive reading, where you go through maybe a paper multiple times. And I'm going to present kind of another version of this, came across like one nice paper that presents this in a very nice structured way. And this is really like a recap of what other applied linguists and language educators have said about how you do intensive reading, or what other writing teachers have said about how you read an academic article and understand it. So this is kind of a nice way of kind of summarizing things that I've talked about before and things that other linguists and writing teachers have talked about. It's called a 3-pass method. So I'm kind of adapting this for this video. So what you want to do is kind of maybe go through the article at least 3 times. You can break this up into maybe more. So 3 passes, going through an article at least 3 times, 3 passes through the article. And the first time you just want to kind of go through it at a very general bird's eye view level. The first pass is you're kind of trying to get the gist or the main idea and main ideas of the article, not a detailed understanding at all. So what you do is first you look through the structural elements. So for example, in a paper, you're going to see, again, these structural elements, the abstract, the introduction, and there are sections and subsections with headings, and you may not see this in the video, but there's like, review the literature, and then a subsection, general literacy ability, and a subsection, definition of da-da-da. So these are section headers and subheaders and sub-subheaders. Look through those, look through the different structural elements, the headings and subheadings, the abstract, the introduction. Look through the main sections. If there's like an experimental or data section, you can maybe skip that, or just go through the headings. Kind of scan. So skim and scan. So scan means you look for keywords and phrases, like words that come up a lot. Are there some words that come up a lot that you don't know? Maybe you can look those up, but don't look up while you're actually trying to read the whole thing. But maybe skim through, or scan through, look for key phrases and key elements and bits of information. In scanning, you might also look at some of the diagrams, models, tables, charts, maybe not too much data tables, but kind of look at those and look at the captions and see what the writer is saying about them. Various elements of the paper, bits of info. Skim through. So skimming kind of means going through something kind of quickly, reading a little bit to get kind of the gist. So skim through important parts. Again, so the important parts especially are the abstract, the introduction. Read those maybe a little more carefully at first, but don't try to understand them. Skim through the literature review section if there is one. Skim through the general discussion section and conclusion. So pay particular attention to those, but just try to look for main ideas. So for example, topic sentences. These will often be like the main key sentences of each paragraph in the body of the paper. It might be the beginning sentence, it might be the last sentence. It may be hard to find them, but don't worry if you can't. So just skim through and identify topic sentences throughout the paper. So get a gist of the general, an idea of the gist, the general meaning of the paper, and kind of the main flow of ideas by skimming the topic sentences or key sentences in each paragraph in the body of the paper. And again, kind of carefully read the really key parts, the abstract, introduction, discussion, conclusion, maybe lit review. Then you kind of think about some key questions. What kind of article is this? The category or genre, is this kind of empirical, qualitative? Is it theoretical? Is it a review paper? Think of the context of the research. Why are the authors doing this research? What's the purpose of the study? Why did they do this? And you can kind of skim the literature review section, get some sort of a cue, some sort of an idea about why they did that. There might be a research question or hypothesis that is specifically stated in the intro or in the lit review section. That might help you. So what's the context of the research? Maybe it's in response to some question in the field or some past studies. What's the context? What's the main idea, the main point of the study? Find the main point of the study? What is the writer trying to do? Try to think in your own words. So in your own words, explain, what is the point of this paper? What is the writer trying to argue for? What's the main point? What are the main points in the body? For example, look through the discussion section and find the main points there. What are the writer's main points? Correctness or validity, and this might be hard for you to judge if you're not very familiar with the area of research, so don't worry if you have trouble there, but do the conclusions seem either valid or correct, or maybe you can't judge if it's correct? Does it make sense to you? Okay, or does it seem really crazy? Contribution, does this seem like a worthwhile paper? What is the author trying to contribute? In other words, why are they doing this? Does this help us to understand the field better? And again, that might be hard if you are just a college student. So what do you think at least think about, what do you think the contribution would be of this paper? If it's a good paper, what would its contribution be to our understanding of this topic? Clarity, is it well written? Just because it's a famous scholar doesn't mean it's well written. Some scholars are bad writers, but is it clearly written such that at least it would make sense? You can understand it after reading it more. Second pass, read it through a little more carefully. Don't try to understand everything. Read through more carefully. Or read particularly the key sections again more carefully. Abstract introduction, maybe a literature review or background section, give some background on the topic. Look through charts, graphs, maybe there's some key quotes, especially if it's a literature paper and they're quoting parts of a poem or a story or novel. Look at the results. If it's an empirical paper, especially if it's a quantitative paper, the data or experiment section is going to be very detailed and long, and there's going to be a lot of details about the statistics you can skip over. But at the end, there's probably a little results section, which summarizes the results of their quantitative or statistical analysis. You can at least read that. You might not understand the statistical details, but it will give you some clue about, okay, what they did with their research. And of course, the discussion and conclusion sections. Read those more carefully. And don't worry if you don't understand everything. You're just reading it through to understand more. Then third pass, reread the whole paper. Again, if there's statistics, details about how the experiment was done, you can kind of skim through that more quickly. But reread the whole paper more closely. Ask questions. Okay, what's the main point of the paper? What's the writer's thesis or main point or purpose? What's the rationale for this research? What's the research question or research hypothesis of the paper, which may or may not be stated directly? What are the research methods, and do they seem to give some valid or persuasive results? Are the results or arguments or conclusions of the writer persuasive? Do they seem persuasive to you? Do they make sense? They seem persuasive, whether it's a scientific paper or more of a humanities paper. Do they make sense to you? Do they seem valid, or at least do they seem persuasive? Or do you see some problems with the logic, how they arrived at their conclusions, the conclusions themselves? Do you see any problems? What are the implications of this study? What does it mean? What would it mean to you in the field? What are the implications of this? The takeaway, the key point. How does it help you understand the topic better? Does it help you understand the topic better? Does it give you some fresh insights? Do you go, oh, wow, that's cool? Or do you go, oh, this is not really interesting. Anybody could have done that. Or this doesn't make sense. I don't think those results are right. Or I don't think his interpretation of this poem make any sense. This is silly. So in terms of persuasiveness and implications, think about that. And then maybe after you've read that, spend some time, take a break, and then while you're lying in bed trying to go to sleep or just taking a walk, in your mind, come back to it again. Okay, rehearse it to yourself. What was the paper about? What was the research question or a hypothesis, or what was the writer's rationale? What was the writer's main point? What was the writer's purpose in writing this paper? What were the main arguments that the writer presented throughout the paper? The main arguments for his or her thesis. Do they make sense to you? Do they seem persuasive? Why or why not do they seem persuasive? What are the implications of this paper? So mentally rehearse it later on. So that's sort of a fourth mental pass I'm going to add to this model, sort of a fourth pass that you do just mentally. And then maybe you have to, cite this paper you're reading for an assignment. Maybe it's something you're going to have to cite when you write your own paper for your class. So think about how you might cite this and use this. Do you agree with the paper? Do you disagree with it? How would you use it if you're writing your own college paper, for your class, for your professor's assignment? How would you cite this paper that you've gone through? You've done the 3-4 passes through it. How do you make sense of it? How would you cite it? How would you use it if you're writing your own paper in the class on this topic? How would you critique it? Just like the paper that you've read, there was maybe a literature review section where the writer or writers critiqued other research. Okay, this has been an overview of how to read academic articles and things that you should understand as you read articles. And perhaps in a later video, I will maybe go through a sample article and explain more by example. So until then, good luck. I'll see you in the next video, and Slava Ukraini. Goodbye.